Hello, History 131. Sorry for not posting something earlier, but I've been extremely busy. Things are going on in my family that I have to deal with. Also, some good news. I just recently got a new publication called For Marion to Montgomery, the Early History of Alabama State University. I don't know why this is reversed, but if you're interested in the history of the university, this is the source. It's available at Amazon or in your library right now. This is my second publication. The first one was on the Tuskegee Airmen. Okay, enough about me. How are you? I hope everything is well. Everyone is staying safe, and your coursework and your other classes are going well. Okay, now I posted an announcement dealing with your research paper, your 5-page research paper. Let's not make it difficult. Pick out your topic and answer the question who, what, when, where, how, in your own words. It's only 3 text pages. Your first page will be your title page, and then page 2, 3, and 4 will be your text, and the 5th page will be your bibliography, which you identify your sources. Okay, now, where were we in this class? The Christianity had basically conquered Europe. Paganism no longer exists. The German had invaded the Western Roman Empire. Constantine had split the empire into half, moved the eastern part of the empire to Constantinople. It is now the official religion of the Roman Empire, where the Roman Empire will collapse at 476 AD due to being overran by Germanic tribes from the north. The Pope became all-powerful in the Western Empire, part of the Empire, Rome. And of course, in the eastern part, the emperor was the most powerful one. But basically, Western Europe developed into Christian kingdoms. And that's where we are today. Now, next week, when we get into chapter 10, we will discuss Islam, particularly the origin of it. It starts in 622 AD, some 600 years after the birth of Christ. It is the third and final Aramic religion. That means it goes back to the patriarch Abraham or Abram. But in 733 AD, the Moors had crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and had conquered Spain and was moving northward into the rest of Western Europe. A key battle took place, the Battle of Tours, 733. This is where the Frankish kingdom, one of those Germanic tribes I was talking about, met the Moors and defeated them and halted their expansion to the rest of Western Europe, allowing Europe to become more Christian instead of Islamic. Can you imagine that? If they had continued through France up into the rest of Europe, probably you and I would be Islamic instead of a Christian today. That's how significant this battle was. So, Charles Martel. But from this time period, from 733 to 843, for the next 100 years, we see a distinct European society emerge, a new social and political organization called feudalism developed. And for the first time since the collapse of the Roman Empire, Western Europe was united under one government, reaching its peak under Charles Martel's grandson, Charlemagne, or Charles the Great. We're going to talk about him more. But Charles ushered in what we call the Carolingian Renaissance. Now, just don't confuse this Renaissance with the Italian Renaissance, which we're going to talk about later. Renaissance simply means rebirth, but this is the Carolingian Renaissance. And it was led by Charlemagne. In 843, Charlemagne's three grandsons bitterly fought a war and divided the continent among themselves and ushered in a period called the Middle Ages. Let's go back though and look at this rise of the Frankish aristocracy and the Carolingian dynasty. They're called Franks. Today they're French. It rose under Clovis. We've already talked about Charles Martel. But the key person that I want to introduce to you is Charlemagne. Let me find him in my notes. Here we go. Charles the Great, Charlemagne, built on the military and diplomatic foundation of his ancestors. He was crude, brutal, but he was a man of enormous intelligence. Yet he could not write his name. Because of the high rate of infant mortality, many sons were required. Charlemagne had a total of 4 legal wives. Remember, polygamy is common during this time period. And 6 concubines, and continued to sire children after the age of 65. However, only 3 sons reached adulthood and only 1 outlived the old man. Charlemagne continued the expansion policy of his ancestors. He became the greatest warrior of the early Middle Ages. He subdued or incorporated northern France, northern Spain, most of Germany, and northern Italy. A key event of him was visiting the Pope and on Christmas Day in the year of 800 and being declared the emperor by the Pope. You see what's going on here? He's placing the Pope above the king. But yet Charlemagne is a man of his own mind. No one controls him. He attempted to usher in an intellectual revival and used the church to produce this and stimulate learning. Learning was needed. Now remember, we go back to the formation of the early church and Christianity. Many believed there was no need to learn, to work, because Christ was going to return and restore heaven here on earth. This led to a downturn in economics as well as in learning. But Charlemagne instituted a revival, and his most enduring legacy was stimulating learning and scholarship. He set in motion a cultural revival that was pursued mainly by the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria. And this is where these monastery members went to Rome, brought back manuscripts, relics, paintings, and other treasures that formed the libraries of which later study was used. The Northumbrian monasteries produced scores of books and commentaries on the scriptures, manuscripts, law codes, letters, and sermons. Remember what we told you earlier about Saint Jerome. He had translated the Bible, the New and Old Testament, from Hebrew, Greek, into Latin. Now everyone could read the vernacular Latin. A scholar of the Northumbrian was Venerable Bede, the most widely read author in the Middle Ages. Bede wrote the Ecclesiastical History of the English Nation, but he also popularized the system of dating events from the birth of Christ. He introduced the term Anno Domini, which means in the year of the Lord, or AD. It does not stand for after the death. Conclusion: Northumbrian played a decisive role in the transmission of English learning in the Carolingian Empire and the continental Europe. Okay, so when Charlemagne dies, his three sons fought over the kingdom. The kingdom fell apart and it was divided among the other lords, and this led to the rise of feudalism. I don't know how to define it, except it is a way of government. Feudalism emerged in Western Europe in the 9th century. It was a type of government in which political power was treated as a private possession and was divided among the large number of lords. Around this time, technological invention had occurred in China. The invention of the stirrup, S-T-I-R-R-U-P. It had arrived in Europe in the 8th century AD. The stirrup revolutionized warfare. The stirrup welded the horse and the rider into a powerful fighting unit or armed cavalry. How many of you have ever ridden a horse? The stirrup is what you put your foot in, both sides, which hold you in the saddle. You can shoot an arrow, throw a spear, but it revolutionized warfare. Also in the 9th century, we see great invasions from the Northmen or the Vikings, and people didn't go to the king or queen for safety. They went to the lord, the count, for protection, and this enlarged the whole in the feudalism, and it created a group of people called serfs, and they lived on the manor, and the Lord was all powerful. By 800 AD, 60% of the population had been reduced to serfdom. Now, serfdom is just a step up from slavery. You did not own anything. You were a property of the estate. But other invaders were, besides the Vikings, would be the Magyars from the east, and of course we've already talked about the Muslims from the east and from the south. But we also see an increase in population. Mild climate contributed to Europe recovering good weather, including mild winter, explaining advances in land reclamation. But also we see Europe coming together as nation states. Charlemagne created the nation state of the French, King Alfred the Great, not King Arthur, unified the English. But the Muslims had occupied, just as they do today, Palestine. This led to what we call the Crusades. And this is the papal claim to the leadership of Christian society. And you've seen the movie Robin Hood. There were 3 crusades. All were failures. The most successful one was the First Crusades. It's a holy war. Christians against Muslims, attempting to recapture Jerusalem, which fell into the hands of the Muslim after they defeated the Byzantines. So the centuries were holy wars sponsored by the papacy for the recovery of the Holy Land from the Muslims, Arabs, and Turks. And this long-standing conflict between Christian and Muslim the Pope saw an opportunity to rewrite the history of the church. I said 3 crusades. There were 4 crusades. So, in conclusion, the civilization that emerged in Europe between 733 and 843 had a definite characteristic. It was feudal, Christian, and infused with Latin ideas and model. The century of a half after the death of Charlemagne in 814 witnessed a degree of disintegration, destruction, disorder, and unparalleled in Europe until the 20th century. The Roman papacy built the first strong government bureaucracy in medieval Europe. In the High Middle Ages, the church experienced general leadership of the European society, and the early Crusades are an example of this leadership. Okay, what else do I need to tell you about this? Let's go back to that feudalism and the manner which these people lived on. The function of the job determined the social classification during the Middle Ages. And the most represented figure of the Christian society in the Middle Ages were peasants, nobles, and monks. The peasants were the ones who did the work. They were the largest and most productive group in medieval Europe. Peasants made up the overwhelming majority of the population, probably more than 90% of the population. There were many levels of peasantry, ranging from complete slave to free and rich. Slaves were found in Western Europe in the High Middle Ages. In fact, the word slave is derived from Slav. If you Google S-L-A-V, you will find they are a group of people that lives in the Baltic fringes of the north. Slav, blonde, blue-eyed, and white. That's where the word slaves come. But it attests to the widespread trade in men and women from the Slavic era in the early Middle Ages. But the distinction between slave and serf was not always clear. Both lacked freedom or the power to do as one wished, and was subject to the arbitrary will of one person, the Lord. A serf, however, could not be bought and sold like an animal, as the slave could. Serfs were tied to the land, and serfdom was a hereditary condition like slavery. A person born a serf was likely to die a serf. A serf could save money and through a third person purchase his freedom. Now, the manor is where they all lived. It was a large estate, basically centered around the lord of the estate. It covers several thousand acres of farmland, and all of the peasants cooperated in cultivating the land. Agricultural improvement occurs during this time period. We also see another technological development. I know you don't believe in this time technology is a development, but just like the stirrup, during this time we see the padded horse collar, which led to the agricultural revolution, the increase in food stuff. Remember, when man's belly is full, he's peaceful, he's docile, he'd rather make love than to make war. Now, scholars believe that the use of the horse in agriculture is one of the decisive ways in which Western Europe advanced over the rest of the world, including the Americas. As you probably don't know, the horse is not native to the Americas. It was brought here by the Europeans. So the Native Americans had no beast of burden. And this is one of the advantages that the Europeans invaders had when they came to the Americas. Life on the manor, for most people, it was country living. They rarely traveled more than 25 miles from their village. People knew what their life work was, and it would be the same with their mother and father. They had a sense of place and pride in that place. Religion and the village gave people a sense of identity, and with it, psychological peace. Modern people wish and have lost many of these reinforcements. The peasant lived lives of quiet desperation, often seeking escape through heavy drinking. What did they drink? We'll talk about that. A peasant household consisted of a simple nuclear family. A typical household numbered about 5 people, the parents and 3 children. Women, as we've already discussed, played a significant role in the agricultural life of the medieval Europe. Women shared the backbreaking work in the fields. Women managed the house. The wife proved management was often all that separated their household from starvation. And this starvation was a very real danger until the 18th century. Early peasant cottage had a small garden and an outbuilding. They grew onions, turnips, garlic, and cabbages. Winter, and the cabbages will be shredded and salted and packed in vats in hot water and turned into kraut. We now put it on our hamburger, but these Europeans ate it during the winter months. The peasant main diet consisted of vegetables because there was usually little else to eat. Meat, usually pork, appeared on the table only on great feast days like Christmas, Easter, and Pentecost. Preserving and storing food were the basic responsibility of women and children. Women also made beer, the universal drink of the common people. The rate of beer consumption was heroic. Each monk at an abbey in England in the 12th century was allotted 3 gallons a day. Can you imagine drinking 3 gallons of beer at once in a day? You would be drunk. A man working the field probably drank more. The mainstay of the diet for all classes were bread. It was hard black substance made of barley, millet, and oats. Deer, wild boars, and other games were strictly reserved for the king and the nobles. Remember Robin Hood? Remember Robin Hood turned into an outlaw by because he killed a deer that supposed to belong to the king. Okay, so here we go. Now, the medieval origin of the modern state, Rome's greatest legacy to Western civilization, was its concept of the state and the law. For 500 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, the state did not exist. It was feudalism that ruled. But gradually, the state would come into being. Something that I need to point out to you is a man named William the Conqueror. He was a Northman, invaded France, claimed the northern part of France, Normandy, and he crossed the English Channel and defeated the Anglo-Saxon and created conflict on that island of England for the next 500 years. He required all of the feudal lords to swear an oath of allegiance to him as king. William the Conqueror preserved the institution of sheriff, the device called the writ, the grand jury. He called for the publication of the Doonesbury Book. So now England has government. France is unified by Philip Augusta and his descendants. And of course, the Germans are led by Otto. But the Italians, Frederick of Barbarossa unified Germany. But now Germany, France, England, Spain, all are ruled by Christian rulers. One other thing I need to introduce to you before we leave this chapter is the Dukes forced King John to sign a treaty called the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta signifies the principle that the king and the government shall be under the law, that everyone, including the king, must obey the law. No one is above the law. In our case, it will be the President of the United States. He supposedly the same laws that applies to you and me applies to the president. We'll see. By the way, election day is coming up. Please go out and vote and do your civic duty. Caver will come back to you next week after the election, and we will talk about the rise of Islam. Be blessed, stay safe, and study your study guide for test 3, which is scheduled for November the 11th. What's November 11th? Veterans Day. But we are not going to celebrate it. You'll be taking your tests on that day. Be blessed. Stay safe. Caver out.